Good evening. On the air, the program time. Today, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, ended his official three-day visit to Russia and began a visit to Ukraine. One of the main results and accomplishments of the Moscow meetings between the Presidents Boris Yeltsin and Bill Clinton was the fact that Russian-American relations were put back on the right track. Andrei Kozyrev stated this today in an interview to Interfax. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia feels that the assertions are completely unjustified that ostensibly at the high-level meetings in Moscow, Russia, which refused to deliver centrifuges to Iran, succumbed to pressure from the United States. For high-placed guests of the United States, it's now tradition to meet in Moscow not just with the President of Russia, but with Russian politicians. For us, it's become a tradition to attentively follow who is invited. This time, the leaders of some factions of the State Duma and heads of regions, Ingushetia, Orlov, and Irkutsk districts. The choice basically was defined by the American ambassador in Moscow, Thomas Pickering. Vladimir Zhirinovsky was not invited. In the private residence of the ambassador over the cup of tea, they discussed the problem of democracy and multi-partiness in Russia. It seems the President of the United States, and not only he, were to be surprised. Today, no one was confrontational, but attempted to find a common denominator at the meeting on a path to holding regular elections, which would be just and truly democratic. If our dear friends, the communists, would speak on their platforms and in the Duma in the same tone, and as they did today with the President, very politely and asking only for a cup of coffee. The strongest impression at the meeting which was held today was that our opposition people, such as the communists and agrarians, turned out to be exclusively loyal to economic and democratic reforms in our country. Maybe accord among Russian politicians in the residence of the American embassy is only a mirage, but maybe indeed something has changed in the understanding of what political battle is and how to conduct it in a democratic country. And at the Russian-American high-level meeting, the sword seems to be without a hint. If there are differences now, that doesn't at all mean a crisis. Ukraine expects that the visit of Bill Clinton will be a significant event, not just in two-sided relations, but also within the system of European security, an event of international life. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma, during an official greeting ceremony for the American President. In the history of Ukraine, this is the first state visit of the President of the United States. 70% of all the dialogues concern problems of economic cooperation. In a brief speech during the official greeting ceremony, Bill Clinton said that the United States welcomes the striving of Ukraine to follow the path of reform and promised that the United States will provide the necessary support. But today, the delegations already achieved agreements on joint study of problems connected with illnesses contracted as a result of the Chernobyl disaster, and also about the joint creation of a science research center on issues of nuclear security and environmental protection. During the talks of the presidents of Ukraine and the United States face-to-face, they discussed the political situation in Ukraine and the problem of Crimean autonomy. Bill Clinton, in the context of those matters, spoke out in complete support of the actions of Ukrainian leadership to resolve emerging problems peacefully and also in recognition of the sovereignty of Ukraine and its territorial wholeness within the existing borders. Parallel with the presidential meetings, 3 expert groups were meeting. The United States feels that a stable, developing and flourishing Ukraine is the pledge for the stability in European security. The United States promised to support Ukraine in developing agricultural industry and its processing industry, the oil processing and natural gas drilling industries. Today's Western press devotes central attention to the results of the Russian-American high-level meeting, but often it's interpreted differently. With an overview, our commentator Igor Rostovtsev. Overall, the Western press is in agreement that the summit was reassuring from the point of view of further development of dialogue between Moscow and Washington. A meeting of compromises, the German newspaper Welt calls the dialogues of the presidents of Russia and the United States. If politics, it writes, is truly the art of achieving the possible, then the meeting in Moscow cannot be called unsuccessful. More categorical in assessments is the American newspaper The Washington Post. During the level meeting, which began and ended in an atmosphere of restraint, feels the newspaper, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, and the Russian President, Boris Yeltsin, renewed attempts to create a new system of security in Europe. However, little was achieved by them in other contentious matters. In other contentious matters, evidently the inferences are obligation before the world in the events in Chechnya. On this matter, the Western press is abundant in diverse commentary. The Yeltsin's concession in the Iran matter, the French tribune writes, met with the hopes of the American president, who achieved nothing on the problem of NATO and Chechnya. Clinton, thereby, it feels, avoided humiliation. However, in resolving major international problems, there was no progress. Yet, what concerns Russia's nuclear deal with Iran, the English Times develops this theme, progress was achieved sufficient to justify the risk taken in holding the meeting. A possibility was created, feels the Solid newspaper, to continue serious talks in other directions. And in this, there's a lesson for Europeans. The analysis of the Western press permits the conclusion that, in its opinion, our current relations with the United States have become more businesslike and pragmatic, and this, it feels, helps us to deal with many unconcealed differences. Boris Yeltsin will announce his decision whether or not he will run for the post of president for a second term after all of the laws on elections are adopted. This was stated by the head of the administration of the president, Sergei Filatov, at a meeting in Moscow with the editors-in-chief of several sources of mass media. According to Filatov, it would not be expedient to issue any kind of statement prior to the election of the State Duma, which will be held earlier than the presidential elections. Gathering after the recess, deputies again embarked on resolving their pre-election problems, and one of the first laws reviewed at the session on elections for the next Duma. With this law, both chambers of Russian parliament experienced serious dispute. The Federative Council yet again returned the document to the Duma, recommended that the elections be held only on the system of one-mandate districts. The Duma, disagreeing with that proposal, continued to insist on its own version, providing for equal number of deputies elected in districts and in lists. Such a futile situation could have led to a constitutional crisis in the country, said the chairman of the Duma Committee on Legislation, Vladimir Isalkov. The absence of law condemns the country to having an absence of a lower chamber. I say this to those deputies who are playing with the law on elections, hoping on election by decree. There will be a decree for sure, but not the one that you expect. As all previous discussion, this discussion of the law was very active. The Duma 2 times attempted to overcome the veto of the Federative Council, but since not one of the options suggested by the Conciliatory Commission suited the deputies in the Duma, an additional recess was announced, and parliamentarians fully used the opportunity to coordinate the positions of the factions and pursue agitational work. As a result, the Duma, voting for the 3rd time, adopted its own draft law providing for equal proportion of deputy mandates, 225 to 225. However, with the discussion of the document, which generated turbulent debate in 2 chambers of parliament, pre-electoral activity in the Duma didn't end today. The leader of the Democratic Party, Sergei Glazyev, said that in counterbalance to the bloc of Viktor Chernomyrdin, the opposition decided to create its own electoral union. Despite this bloc, the Agrarian Party of Russia, will also run within its own amalgamation. And the announcement of its creation, the 8th of May, was signed by Ivan Rybkin, but this bloc will be headed by the leader of the agrarians, Mikhail Lapshin. The political movement Women of Russia also enters the pre-election campaign and will run independently, said Yekaterina Lachova. Hence, not just the majority of Russian political forces has defined its political faction affiliations, and each day as the pre-election campaign, the number of pre-electoral blocs increases. The final decision on the continued fate of the moratorium on combat in Chechnya will be adopted by the President of Russia possibly today by the end of the day. Interfax was told this by a source in the apparatus of the aide of the head of state on national security. According to that source, this issue currently is under discussion. The term of the effect of the moratorium pursuant to the decree of Boris Yeltsin, as is known, expires at 0000 hours the 12th of May. To date, constitutional order in Chechnya was ensured by the military subdivisions dispatched here from many points of Russia. Having served in the hot points the required 1.5 months, they return home and their place is taken by others. But possibly very soon, the need of such missions will, if not completely, but at least to some degree be decreased, because in the environs of Grozny, the formation of a separate motor artillery brigade is being concluded, which will take on a significant portion of the functions of federal forces. The brigade has already begun to fulfill responsibilities that it has been charged with, protecting accesses to the northern airport and Hankala, the railway station as well. Grozny now is the site of its permanent location. By almost 1/2, the big brigade is manned by contract fighters who have come to Chechnya to fight voluntarily. The main aim of the brigade currently is to provide for the presence, the forceful presence of Russia on its own territory, and the missions delegated by the command are not to conduct combat activity, but to provide assistance to organs of internal affairs and the internal forces in sustaining law and order and completing the disarmament of unlawful armed formations on the territory of Chechnya. Another meeting of the State Commission on the Restoration of the Economy and Social Sphere of the Chechen Republic began with information about the progress of restorational work. As of today, 3,000 tons of construction refuse has been transported out. The planned restoration of energy, natural gas, heat, water and sewage systems is underway in Grozny, employing 2,000 specialists. The Ministry of Roads and Communications announced the restoration of railway traffic, Grozny Mineral Waters, and a regular train, Grozny-Moscow. In Grozny proper, 22 bus routes have been opened up. Ministry of Healthcare reported the opening of 4 hospitals, an obstetrical clinic and several general clinics, and also first aid brigades exist. 50,000 Chechen school children have returned to their studies. 119 schools have been opened. In essence, the spring sowing season has been completed. Of 135,000 hectares, 100 has been planted, and all of this under combat conditions. Today, from the crop fields, 117,000 various mines have been removed. After a lengthy break produced by war, today students resume their studies in the Pedagogical Institute in Grozny. Temporarily, prior to the repair of the building in the center of the city, they were allotted a premise in one of the kindergartens. Preparing to resume classes are also 2 other Chechen higher academic institutions, the University and the Oil Institute. To the Kazansky terminal of the capital, today the first high-speed train arrived since September of last year, number 86, Grozny-Moscow. A correspondent of Future TASS was told this in the press service of the Ministry of Roads and Communications. Previously, that train had been known under the name Terik. Beginning the 12th of May, the train will regularly run from Grozny on even days of the week. The 46-year-old Lieutenant General Pavel Tarasenko, appointed the 10th of May as commander of the Russian border troops in Tajikistan. ITAR-TASS was told this today in the press center of the command of the Russian border troops in that republic. Previously, Tarasenko had been commander of the headquarters and deputy commander of the forces in the Caucasus Special Border District. The Lieutenant General, Anatoly Chichurin, who had headed the group of Russian border troops in Tajikistan since 1993, with a promotion, has been placed on a new place of service. The border post on the compound of the 11th outpost of the Moscow Border Regiment was shot at from the rear from automatic weapons the 10th of May, 2045 local time. Among the Russian border troops, there were no injuries. This, a correspondent of ITAR-TASS was told also in the press center of the command of the Russian border troops in Tajikistan. A series of terrorist acts which occurred in Dushanbe in the last while has found its logical conclusion. I'll remind you, on the 23rd of February, an attack was made on a bus which was carrying replacement physicians to Border Hospital. A few days after, beginning 2 militia employees who had begun service had been killed, and at the Kurgandu Bay post, 2 Russian military servicemen were shot. Now, it was learned that all of these acts were the work of the hands of an underground terrorist organization operating in Dushanbe. Through the joint efforts of the employees of the Ministry of Security and the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Republic, detained on the territory of Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan not just are the perpetrators, but the leaders of that underground organization. According to information from sources within the Ministry of Security, overall 13 people have been arrested. Their involvement in committing the series of terrorist acts was proven, and they themselves don't deny it. Where they were detained, money, ammunition, and weapons have been confiscated, specifically Kalashnikov automatic weapons with silencers, which for now the 4 structures don't even have. The investigation continues. The meeting of the president of Tajikistan, Emomali Rakhmonov, with the leader of the Tajik opposition, Saeed Abdul Nouri, will begin the 15th of May in Kabul. This was learned by a correspondent of ITAR-TASS today from informed sources. Currently, these sides are completing preparation for the forthcoming meeting, the agenda which is planned to be open. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, has sent to the President of Azerbaijan, Geydar Aliyev, and the President of Armenia, Levon Ter-Petrosyan, messages on the occasion of the first anniversary of the ceasefire in Nagorno-Karabakh. President Yeltsin called this decision brave and the only possibly certain step, and in the message, hope is expressed that the heads of the sides in the conflict will be prepared for serious steps at the meeting with each other in the vital interests of the Transcaucasus people and the entire Commonwealth. As Interfax reports, Azerbaijani authorities decided to free all Armenian prisoners of war and hostages on the territory of the Republic. The instructions to inform the representative of the International Committee of the Red Cross in Baku of this were issued today by the Minister of National Security of Azerbaijan, the chairman of the State Commission on Prisoners of War and Hostages, Namik Abbasov. The minister stated that 35 people will be released. On Wednesday, the decision to release all the Azerbaijani hostages and prisoners of war was adopted by Armenia. In Sevastopol today, a group of officers arrived, headed by the head commander of the military naval fleet of Russia, the Admiral Felix Gromov. As Intertas is told, he is visiting the Black Sea Fleet on a business visit in order to study the situation and develop practical measures to resolve the fleet's problems. The Lieutenant General Alexander Lebedь stated today that he does not intend to leave his post as commander of the 14th Army and will continue to command the troops temporarily stationed in the Pridnestrovyan region of Moldavia. In an interview to a correspondent of Intertas, the commander of the army emphasized that, as previously, he doesn't approve of the plans of the Ministry of Defense of Russia to reform the ruling of the army, because in this opinion it will lead to weakening it. In the work of the founding conference of the electoral movement, Our Home, Russia, there will be 308 delegates with the right to vote and around 200 guests. This was stated today at the session of the government by the leader of the movement, the Prime Minister of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin. He reminded that the conference will convene tomorrow in the Cinema Center on Krasnopresna. Later, the government embarked on discussing economic matters. The execution of the budget for 1994 by funds of the Social Bloc was examined today in the government. The bookkeeping of all four of them, the pension, medical, social security, and employment services, are quite similar. In the plus column, revenues were between 80 to 90% of the plan, which is caused by the complicated economic situation and non-payments. In the expenditure column, difficulties were cited connected with indexation of minimum salary and pension. Here, without compensation from the federal budget, the pension fund, for example, simply cannot do. There was also complaints about the organization in allocation of funds. Hence, money dispersed for passes should not be spent on the daily support of camps. As a result, 400 of them never did open, and on the accounts of the funds, significant leftovers accumulated. The funds have additional revenues, which are provided through revenues from placing funds in securities and commercial bank accounts. We're speaking of trillions of rubles. And of course, members of the cabinet could not agree that there exist, so to speak, foreign extra budgetary money, but commensurate with the budget, 40% of the revenues, which can freely, without control, circulate on the market. As a result, the discussion moved in a different direction. One after another, the ministers expressed apprehension that with the general strict state budget, the funds far too carelessly spend their funds. Significant sums are spent on sustaining their own apparatus and on computerization, which is duplicated by each fund. Meanwhile, the collection of the money for social needs is pursued mostly by the tax services and not by the funds. The government overall adopted the execution of the budget, but simultaneously decided to set up an interdepartmental task group to define strategies of conduct of these extra budgetary organizations, and also proposed to include among the members of the group representatives of interested ministries: labor, social security, healthcare, and finances. Having taken effect the 15th of May, the decision of the President of Russia to remove benefits in the foreign economic sphere will yield more than $2 billion for the state budget, a correspondent of Business Task was told by the Deputy Chairman of the Government of Russia, Oleg Davidov. He feels that the cancellation of customs benefits will favorably affect the overall development of foreign trade in Russia. In Primorye, a state commission has arrived. As was already reported, the decision to conduct an inspection was made on the initiative of the first Vice Premier of Russia, Anatoly Chubais, at a state conference on the 3rd of May, where they discussed ways to perfect the system of payments and mutual transactions. In the opinion of Chubais, the Primoryan governor, Yevgeny Nazratenko, and his team permitted several violations in using credits which were dispersed from Moscow for the needs of the RIM, fuel, and energy sector during the winter period. The rate of the Russian ruble against the American dollar in trading at the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange continues to strengthen gradually. Today it rose by another 2 points and was at the level of 5,106 rubles against one American dollar. The American ambassador in Russia, Thomas Pickering, has conveyed to the Magnitogorsk metallurgical plant a grant from the American government of more than $700,000. For Russians, the word grant sounds unusual. Even in the last edition of the Encyclopedic Dictionary, it doesn't exist. But the word means a stipend or a gratuitous sum which is allotted to execute some sort of a manufacturing program. Magnitogorsk plant, which for half a century is the world's largest producer of cast iron steel and rolled steel, in the last years is undergoing a second birth. A large oxygen converter was installed and a facility, and this has helped to take tens of the open hearth steel furnaces out of commission, which were polluting the atmosphere of the city. But to complete reconstruction and set up a most contemporary technological process at the plant, funds are needed, around $100 million. And the government of the United States has allocated to the Magnitogorsk plant a gratuitous sum so as to immediately involve in the reconstructive process some of the leading American engineering firms. With the destination of the Turkish city Samsun is the cargo ferry, which left the South Russian port of Taganrog. Historically, this is the first ferry shipment between the Turkish coast and the city, which was established by Peter the Great. After the collapse of the USSR, Russia had no other southern port capable of receiving and serving ships of the river ocean ferrying type, or the ports at the crossroads or port at the crossroads of strategic auto and rail routes. Today, the briefing of the Presidential Aid on Economic Matters, Alexander Lifshitz, was held dedicated to the decree of the President on measures to provide for guaranteed revenues from privatization into the federal budget and the federal law on restoring and protecting the savings of the citizens of Russia. Here we're speaking of the mass sale of state packages of shares of privatized companies, except for those which produce goods of strategic designation to provide for the national security of the country. The decreed Federal Commission under the government of the Russian Federation should establish a list of strategic companies. Established also are terms of distributing revenues from the sale of state property. 55% is assigned to the federal budget for the subjects of the Federation's budgets 10%, local budgets 4%, to private companies 14%. The shares will be sold at no lower than the nominal, so the talk of sale of next to nothing is without basis. Of strategic significance is the position permitting the sale of land under the companies, and its price is established at 10 times the rate of the basic tax. Regarding the law to restore the savings of the citizens of Russia, in the opinion of Alexander Lifshitz, the question is how, in what time frame, and in what sequence it is to be realized. The value of it is equivalent to 500 trillion rubles. That's a little bit less than 3 federal budgets of 1995. That means that if we don't pay the defense or coal sector or anyone at all, and do this for 3 years consecutively, this law in 3 years may be realized in full volume. Croatia continues to exacerbate tension in the Serb Krajina, committing hostile actions against the UN peacekeeping forces located there. This was stated today by an official representative of the UN Secretary General, Joe Sills. The presence of the UN peacekeepers in former Yugoslavia each day is threatened with greater danger. Such a conclusion is made upon hearing reports from that region, and it's difficult to say absolutely where it's worse in Sarajevo, which is again being shot at from long-distance weapons. The united forces of the Bosnian Croats and Muslims are again attempting to cut off the so-called Posavins corridor, uniting Serb lands in Bosnia. Wars underway in Croatia, and everywhere the subdivisions of the UN peacekeepers are located, whose aim is to prevent the spread of the armed conflict. According to Joe Sills, in all of the sectors of the Serb Krajina where the blue helmets are located, extremely tense situation has developed. Not only did the Croat forces blockade almost all of the UN posts on the line of division, but lately they have begun to mine access to those posts. Attempts to organize delivery of food and supplies for the peacekeeping subdivisions, in essence, are unsuccessful, and often the Croats open fire on observation points. As a result of one of such incidents, a Czech soldier was injured. Crossfires underway in the zone of the location of the Russian battalion, commanded by the Colonel Alexander Nizhgorodov, And he said that the safety of Russian military is under threat. However, the battalion continues to professionally fulfill its peacekeeping obligations. Incidentally, in the opinion of specialists in the region, one may say the same thing about all the soldiers and officers from the UN subdivisions. And as the Colonel Nizhegorod noted, the Blue Helmets, for now, are still capable of preventing a full collapse of the peacekeeping operation as this occurred in Western Slavonia. It's absolutely clear that it's impossible to fold up the mission in former Yugoslavia at the current moment because this could lead to the most destructive consequences. The President of France, François Mitterrand, accepted today the resignation of the Prime Minister Edouard Balladur. At the same time, the head of state has asked him to continue to fulfill his duties until the recently elected President Jacques Chirac takes office and appoints a new Prime Minister. Last night in the Indian cities, Chirag Sharif in the state of Kashmir, a Muslim mosque of the 14th century was burnt down. This was done by the gunmen of one of the extremist groups, the official Indian representative said. Prime Minister of India, Narasimha Rao, called this an act of vandalism and admonished Kashmir residents to observe peace and tranquility. Lately in Kashmir, armed groups have become more active, which want the state to separate from India. On the eve of the mosque arson, gunmen burned down around 900 homes and stores in Chirag Sharif. The Japanese religious cult Aum Shinrikyo is suspected of preparing possible poisonous substances at one of the Australian farm properties which it acquired in 1993. An analysis of sheep wool indicated the presence of the nerve-paralyzing gas sarin. This was the gas used during the gas attack on passengers in the Tokyo metro. In the United States, charges have been laid against Terry Nichols, the second man who is suspected of blowing up the building in Oklahoma City. In Nichols' home, sales slips were found for materials which are presumed to have been used in preparing explosive substance. In South Africa, 100 people died in one of the world's largest gold mines. This happened after an underground railway contingent fell into a shaft and onto an elevator cage containing miners. Among the Vietnamese refugees in Hong Kong, and local police clashes occurred. Surrounded by the police regiments, the Vietnamese climbed onto the roofs of one of the camps and hurled rocks at their adversary. This is only one of the episodes in the forced repatriation of Vietnamese to Hong Kong. The United States is preparing reciprocal action against Japan in the trade war. Washington is planning to raise up to 100% customs tariffs on Japanese extra-class automobiles. These measures could be adopted because Tokyo still refuses to open up its market for the import of American automobiles. The United States yet hopes that an amicable agreement will be reached with Japan without strict sanctions. Two Zaire towns are in the grips of an epidemic and fever. More than 100 have already died. The outburst of the epidemic is caused by the deadly Ebola virus against which there is no medication. Dispatched urgently to Zaire is a group of physicians by the World Healthcare Organization. The Russian cosmonauts Vladimir Dezhurov and Gennady Strikalov tomorrow morning will spend 5.5 hours in open space, completing preparatory work for the docking on the orbital station Mir of the new Spectre complex. The third member of the crew, the American astronaut Norman Taggart, will be in the module Crystal and coordinate through instructions from Earth the assembly of solar batteries. And now, a report for those for whom usual flight on an airplane causes problems, never mind space flight. Our personal correspondents in London report. Fear of flight, fear of heights. The London Heathrow Airport is the only air terminal in the world with a special service for these complexes. The airport, which during the year passes through 50 million passengers, lives like a big city. Together with endless flows of humans, along its paths, the joy of meetings and bitterness of partings and stress pass through. Behind these doors, the SOS of unsteady nerves is received 24 hours a day. Professional psychologists, invited to work at the airport by an independent agency, provide first aid for the human factor. If you lose your ticket to your flight, your passport, or you receive grievous news, you're supported by human kindness. However, for now more than 10 years in Heathrow Airport, passengers are offered psychotherapeutical services of a particular profile. Bob Maynard helps to acquire wings of confidence. If you don't fear flying in your dreams or even enjoy it, why are you afraid to get into a plane, he says to his patients. For bravery, he usually advises that one take not vodka or cognac, but an aspirin tablet. Subliminal suggestion at times helps. Unfortunately, fear, including fear of height, is a river which one may enter many times over. elsewhere. Therefore, the sign reading travel care will probably always hang in Heathrow, and passenger service of the future will not exclude hypnotists who help to forget about flight phobia between the requests to fasten and unfasten seatbelts. Festivities in Moscow on the occasion of the 50th anniversary victory of fascism were the most grandiose and impressive of all of those which were underway in European countries. This opinion was expressed by the chairman of the government, Viktor Chernomyrdin, today at the session of the Cabinet of Ministers. In Murmansk, there is a group of veterans of the Second World War from England and the United States. They participated in the celebrations of the 50th anniversary of victory. The festive salutes thundered through and celebrations ended, but they haven't left. These white-haired people are interested to visit those sites where 50 years ago, together with the Soviet soldiers, they defended the skies of the transpolar region, led caravans with cargo across the North Atlantic to the perpetual port Murmansk. It was interesting to see the Museum of Combat Glory and touch those planes on which at one time they flew. Remember combat youth and their fallen comrades. English veterans Peter Skinner and Walter Raleigh know, as no one else, the ruined Murmansk. They called the road to hell the path across the North Atlantic. I came here first when I was 18 years old. It was freezing cold and constantly there was bombing, but people endured and survived, and I bow my head before them. Those who were born in 1945 are called peers of victory. For many of them, fathers and grandfathers didn't return from war. Their childhood was on dust and ashes, and their youth coincided with the time of the great feats of labor of the country, when, strumming guitar strings, they would go to Komsomol construction sites, believing in new cities and great discoveries. The post-war generation of enthusiasts, and today they are 50. And as those who accomplished the great combat feat in full measure, they gave their best years to their homeland. Perhaps that is why this evening in the Palace of the Youth, where the dynasties of doctors, builders, pilots, commanders and actors gathered, was not just a celebration of common victory, but as well the unforgettable celebration of youth, spring and love. Half a century after the war, we built our relations in a new way with former adversaries. The celebration of the 50th anniversary of the end of war in Europe was a bright symbol of reconciliation of the peoples, which incidentally is not just manifested during festivities. On the sprawling plateaus, reflecting in the quiet waters of lakes, stands the formidable fortress of the St. Joseph Volokholamsk Monastery, at one time the spiritual center of enlightenment in Russia, established by the abbot Joseph in the 15th century. Through a long road of obedience, he came here to create an hermitage here, which from the beginning should have announced its service to the world. 50 years ago, here, war rumbled through. In October of 1941, Volokholamsk was taken by the Germans. In the monastery, the belfry was blown up, a unique engineering structure built during the life of St. Joseph. During the occupation of Volokholamsk, a German soldier took as a souvenir the cross on the altar and for half a century kept it. In 1989, learning that the famous Volokholamsk monastery is being rebirthed, decided to return the taken relic. Now this holy object is again on the church altar. Today, in the rebirth of the St. Joseph Volokholamsk monastery, participating is the German land Rheinland-Pfalz. The parliamentary delegation, which came to celebrate the 50th anniversary victory, visited the holy cloister where the great Tsar Ivan III died, and which was visited by his grandson Ivan the Terrible, who would come to venerate the relics of St. Joseph. The common building, which is to contain the monastic cells, a conference hall and a guest room, is being restored by 18 German workers. The German Minister of Culture says that this is an act of reconciliation and our repentance before the Russian people. The people still don't know the paths, how to seek means of healing and those therapeutic herbs which fed the Russian soul. Therefore, monasteries, all of them without exception, should be spiritual centers. With this, I bid you farewell. The program will be continued as usual by the sports news. All the best. Good evening. On Channel 1, the sports news. Yesterday, the holder of the Cup of Cups in soccer was named. The Spanish Zaragoza, beating the English Arsenal 2-1, continued, thereby the sad tradition for the winners of the tournament. Never in the history of that tournament did a single club win the prize 2 times in a row, and the defeat of Arsenal, which seemed quite possible to violate the veto, as the result turned out to be curious. A few seconds before the end of additional time, Naim hit hard toward the goalpost, not particularly counting on success, but fortune at that moment for the goalie Simeno turned toward the Spaniards. The ball, on an unbelievable curve, entered the net together with the goalkeeper. First of all, an impression was created that Arsenal couldn't be beaten at all. In the quarterfinals, playing 1-1 with Asara, the British won 1-0. In the previous round, the Cannoneers were saved in a hopeless situation in the match against Sampdoria, and on the eve, when Saragossa the second time led after Sneijder's goal, Arsenal again played back, and Hartson scored. And yet the old tradition was stronger than predictions. Saragossa is the holder of the title. And the Arsenal team, which was unsuccessful in the last season and in the English Championships, will now watch the match between Blackburn and Manchester United in the last round, where the fate of the title will be decided. Yesterday, MU beat Southampton 2-1 and now is behind the leader by 2 points. And in the Dutch Championships, the leader is known 3 games before the end. Amsterdam Ajax, brilliantly performing throughout the entire season, in the last match beat Utrecht 2-1 and officially has confirmed its championship rights with the impressive difference of 94-26. At the tournament of the European Championships in mini soccer in the Spanish Las Palmas, the capital club Dima demolished the Croat Sokole 9-1, 5 goals for Jurominka. If today our team doesn't lose to the Italian Turin, then the Russians will enter the finals. Today at the World Handball Championships, the Russian team will play with the Moroccan team. I'll remind you that our athletes lead in the group together with the Czech and Croat teams. At this hour, the results of the match of our other rivals is known. The club Slovenia 34-26. For the 9th day in St. Petersburg, the Spartakiada of the Commonwealth is underway, dedicated to the 50th anniversary of victory. In the competitions, there are 11 Commonwealths of the CIS and also 11 states of the CIS and also the teams of St. Petersburg and Moscow. Today, the winners and players have already received 120 gold, the same number of silver, and 135 bronze medals. Hospital St. Petersburg evidently is well disposed to its guests. All of the visiting teams have already received various awards. Today, the spectrum of competition was most colorful. The volleyball team of the hosts beat the Russian team 3-0. The Russians took revenge in handball. The men's team of Russia has won in the team competitions on fencing and won the team championship in table tennis as well. We have prepared this report jointly with our colleagues from St. Petersburg. The regular playoff matches were held in the NHL in the Eastern Conference. In the pair New York Rangers-Quebec, the Stanley Cup holders are ahead. The Rangers won at home 4-3 and leads in the series 2-1, 1 goal each for Zubov and Nemchimov. The goal pass went to Kovalyov. After 2 victories away from home, New Jersey at home lost to Boston 2-3, and the Bruins hence have reduced the score in the series. New Jersey is ahead 2-1. In other matches, Washington demolished Pittsburgh 6-2. Buffalo beat Philadelphia 3-1. 1 goal was scored by Alexander Mogilny. In the NBA, in the semifinals of the Eastern Conference, the score in the match of the series Orlando-Chicago is evened 1-1. The team of Michael Jordan has won 104-94 away from home, and Jordan himself gained 38 points, leaving behind the giant Magic Shaquille O'Neal. At the men's tennis tournament in Hamburg in the quarterfinals, amusing the public somewhat, the numbers 2 seed Pete Sampras is in the next ring, beating Daniel Wacek in 3 sets. For the conclusive match of the tournament, the group is very solid. Apart from Sampras, among the marvelous 8 is the number 1 seed Andrei Agassi and also Goran Ivanišević and Sergei Bruguera. At a major chess tournament in Spain, after the second round, a tie has been established. Viktor Kashnoy from Switzerland leads and Valery Sala from Spain playing a tie. Alexander Bilavsky, after the defeat at the start, has beat Jan Tiemann. This was the sports news on Channel 1. All the best. Good evening. About the weather for tomorrow. The cyclone, which today has brought abundant precipitation and cold air into the central regions of Russia, is shifting to the north. Tomorrow, its center will be located over the east of the Arhangelsk district. In the zone of that cyclone and related atmospheric fronts in the north of the European part of Russia, in the east of the Volgovatsk area, over the central Volga and the central Ural area, it will be cloudy with rain and wet snow. During the day, +3 to 8 degrees in the Nenetsk Autonomous District, 0-5 over the central Ural, up to +20 degrees. The central and northwestern areas, Karelia, the Kola Peninsula, and also the Baltic states, will be in an area of high pressure. Here, variably cloudy skies are expected. Precipitation is possible only on the Kola Peninsula. During the coming night, it will still be cold, 0+5, in the central and northwestern area, down to -5. During the day, it will be significantly warmer, +10 to 13. A belt of high pressure is spreading tomorrow to the central Chernozem, Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova regions, Rostov, Krasnodar, Stavropol, Rim areas, Kalmykia, the Lower Volga, and the republics of the Northern Caucasus. Therefore, on this broad territory, it will be mostly cloudy. During the day, temperatures will indicate +18 to 13 in the south of Ukraine, in Krasnodar, Stavropol, Rim areas, up to +25. An atmospheric front to the southern Ural will bring rain and colder weather during the day, +10 to 15. Beyond the Caucasus, clear skies mostly during the day, 20 to 25 in the mountains, a possibility of thunderstorms, and the weather in Petersburg and Moscow. In St. Petersburg, it will be mostly clear. Precipitation is unlikely at night, -1 to 3 during the day, +10 to 12. In the capital, tomorrow, partly cloudy skies, no precipitation. Winds are weak. At night, 0-2. In the suburbs, down to -5. During the day, +11 to 13. On the weekend, it will be warmer, up to +15 to 18. That completes our broadcast. Goodbye.